So let's start, Robert. Why did you show people that film? What was the important part of the message of that film for this audience?
Well, Ivanhoe Mines is a huge overnight success after about 26 years of hard work. And people don't really understand what it takes to find a mine, engineer a mine, build a mine. There's a shortage of sriracha sauce in Japanese restaurants today. There's a shortage of baby food. There's a shortage of chips to make an F-150 Ford pickup truck. There's a shortage of shipping containers in Los Angeles Harbor. But in order to build the productive capacity to actually keep the lights on and electrify the world economy, we have an astronomical amount of demand for new metal production and almost nothing being developed. So we want you to understand that there's a scarcity in the copper mining industry, because in Latin America, historically, when it goes Yankee go home, Latin America stays bad for 30 years. The largest copper producer right now is Chile. And Chile has a really bad proposed constitution and is uninvestable today. So when we look at the world holistically, it's very hard to go to a place where you really can mine high-grade copper with a low environmental impact. There's 14,000 people working there. The mine's making, I'd say at today's low price, $6 or $7 million a day. That's 60 or 70 million every 10 days, a couple $100 million a month. That will go to $10 million a day as it expands. But you don't just turn on a mine like that. You just don't. It's extremely rare. And copper mining, if we were underground here in this room, the average thickness of the ore is about 11 meters. It's a little bit higher than this ceiling. And the ore body is longer than the curvature of the Earth. If I'm on a ship at sea, and you're on a ship at sea, and you disappear over the horizon due to the curvature of the Earth, that's 26 kilometers of distance to disappear over the horizon. The ore body is more than 30 miles long. Not kilometers, miles. So it'll be going for 100 years. But with all of that production, that's only about 2.5%, 3% of global copper production, and a very small fraction of the new copper production we need. So I just want you to know that we have an irresistible force. That's the demand for these metals. Now it's a national security demand. Then anything. The new American tanks, for example, are electrified. They're highly electronic. The tank can go very high speeds. You know, the better tank wins. And so we find that the Army, Navy, Air Force is very concerned on national security grounds for these critical metals. I'm just going to explain this quickly. When I grew up, some of you are old enough like me to remember there was a food pyramid from the United States Department of Agriculture, because after World War II we had industrialized agriculture. And you were supposed to eat a certain number of glasses of cow's milk, 4 8-ounce glasses of cow's milk, and a certain number of eggs and cheese. And up on top of the pyramid was that steak. If you go to California today, people eat wheatgrass juice and tofu. But they wanted you to eat that after World War II. Now, the Pentagon also had a food pyramid, and they've just woken up that they had all the wrong metals. And when Vladimir Putin is threatening us with a hypersonic missile, which is coming at you at 8 times the speed of sound, there's no defense. We need metals to make those missiles. We need critical raw materials, and suddenly the Pentagon realizes we don't have the right food supply chain in metals. And I want you to know these are a huge amount of capital and effort to try to find these metals and bring them in production. It's a dirty job, somebody has to do it, but hidden behind me is the periodic table. We only have one known periodic table in this particular known universe. There may be parallel universes, but in this one there's 8 or 9 metals that are absolutely critical. If you own those metals, you'll do very well over time. And we just want you to understand from the point of view of a stupid miner that mining is not a business for intelligent people. It's really hard to build a mine. So that timeline was probably a dozen of Rick's conferences, repeating the same message. It's very, very hard to bring a mine in production. Very, very difficult. Now, there is such a thing as male childbirth. It's called a kidney stone. I've had one. Man, does that hurt. I always talk about women having a 100-kilogram baby and how much it hurts. That's a mine. But male childbirth is the same thing. Just to birth that tiny little kidney stone, there's a huge amount of grief involved. So don't try to go build a mine. It's a really hard thing to do. And we want you to understand huge demand, a huge fundamental requirement for something, and an incredible amount of work and intestinal fortitude to actually manifest it. And it's that scarcity that, as people recognize that, that's why you can make a capital investment and make money.
The lesson that we've been trying to get across in this conference for now, I think, 30 years, has been that some people become serially successful. Some people are able to synthesize empirical processes enough that they become intuitive. We very recently, of course, mourn the passage of your peer Lucas Lundin. One of the things, what I want to get across here is, in a sense, that movie, for the first time in your career, perhaps understated the timeline, because that movie didn't talk about the 15 years and the millions of dollars you spent in Africa before you got the encouragement of the Kamoa discovery, the African mineral field saga. Do you have any sense of how much time and how much money you spent before you got encouragement?
Well, it's like being in the wine business. You know, you grow the grapes, you have to plant the grapes, they have to get mature. Sometimes there's not enough rain or the grapes dry, you're at the mercy of the weather. Then the grapes take 30, 40 years to be, you know, to make grapes that Robert Parker will rank at 97 points, and then you got to put them in the bottle, and the bottles have to age. And if you're the Rothschild family, you own Chateau Lafite Rothschild. It's very good business because you have the benefit of all that time behind you, and you're selling wines that are ready to, you know, a generation to produce for gigadollars. I have a friend, Nat Rothschild, and he said,
Are we going to get back to a mine ever?
No, Chateau Lafite. Nat says, Chateau Lafite Rothschild, it's the only wine they can pronounce in Chinese. They get a very good price for it, you know. So we're in the mining business. We have things already that are aged 10, 15 years. When we show you Tintic, that was 26 years of negotiation with Spence. He's German. He's tough to deal with, you know. And he worked 47 years on that ground. So by the time something pops out, it's like the wine has been produced. There's still years to go, but it's a very difficult business to produce critical raw materials. And we actually have a panic in our government about where these things are going to come from. Somebody just asked about rare earths. They're not rare and they're not earths. They're metals. There's a lot of misconception about a lot of things. Somebody else asked about lithium. We could talk about all these subjects at great length, but copper is absolutely fundamental to the development of the world economy. Absolutely fundamental. We can't do anything without copper metal. There are others. There are other very critically important metals, a number of them that are critical for national security. And so it's very good to have this kind of conference and talk about where things come from. Everything you touch, we mined it. That plastic cup, we mined it. Or we grew it agriculturally, and our modern agriculture is totally dependent on tractors and fertilizer and stuff that we mine. So this is the revenge of the miners. But what you're mining, what you're investing in, what we're mining, is very important.
So Robert, when I get an email from you, it frequently says "from my brain." And one of the things that's been important for me is getting across the fact that at least the exploration part of the business initially is more of a knowledge business. It's more analogous to research and development than it is an asset-intensive business, because these properties, when we first get in touch with them, they're actually liabilities. They're excuses to spend money rather than sources of funds. One of the things that's impressed me in doing business with you over 30 years has been the caliber of the earth scientists and others that you've been willing to attract, and your ability to motivate them. I don't know if you know this, but I was talking to our mutual friend Doug Kerwin once, and I said, so tell me what working for Robert's like. And he said, for 15 years, people told me I had great ideas, and Robert drilled them. Yeah. Tell me something about the intellectual capital around mining and why the scientist, why the financier, why the promoter is so critical. Tell me about the organic part of mining. Okay, Chateau Lafitte. Yeah.
No, early in the years of Apple Computer, Steve Jobs was the promoter of Apple Computer. Steve Wozniak wrote all the code.
Right.
But Steve had a thing called the Freak Show, where he had a huge room like this, and his engineers could get all the pizza and ice cream they wanted, and there were people with Playboy magazine on the wall, and pictures of all kinds of weird stuff, and they could go to a counter and get any kind of semiconductor material they wanted, and he called it the Freak Show, and he just let people come and bring him ideas. And so geologists are left-brained people. They're using a lot of intuition, and so it's a lot like managing a kindergarten. If you're running a kindergarten and you have to go to the bathroom and leave the kids, you have to give them a lot of butcher paper and finger paint, because if you don't, a little fat kid's going to poke a little girl in the eye with a fork if they don't have enough art supplies. So managing geologists, they have to be able to, first of all, not be punished for drilling a dry hole. Because we're in the business of drilling dry holes. We have to test geologic concepts with no punishment for failure. In major mining companies, if you fail, there's a punishment. Somebody uses that against you in your career. So we instill a Silicon Valley culture where people can take risk and test ideas and be amply rewarded. Everybody in our companies have exposure to equity. So there's sort of an ownership culture. And a good manager has a very little thin vein in him or her of pure cruelty. Sometimes we fire people the Australian way. We say, "G'day, mate, it's a beautiful day, you're fired. Enjoy the surf." And then morale improves if you fire the right person. So in a very intensive Silicon Valley kind of culture, you can attract very, very bright people. So exploration is a 24-hour-a-day obsession. People dream about their geologic concepts, and we test very big ideas. We're not interested in little ideas. Now, when you were growing up, if you had a brother or sister, you went on an Easter egg hunt. You've got an older brother and sister, and you kept on looking for an Easter egg in the same spot. You never found it. You got to go somewhere new, where your older brother and sister didn't already look for an Easter egg. So in exploration, you have to look at the entire globe. Our planet is actually quite small, quite small. I mean, my dentist is in Salzburg, Austria. I just flew here from my dentist to see Rick. So we're in 63 countries, and we're looking at a lot of very large, very meaningful concepts. And in fact, we're crazy. We're going to explore the United States of America. That's a really off-the-wall idea, because during the Clinton administration, some of these, the Obama administration, you'd have to be insane to try to come and do business in mining in the United States, because people never saw a mine they liked. Now people are realizing that solar power, wind power, green, get a Tesla, greening the world economy, the whole democratic side of the political spectrum is starting to get nervous as they watch Germany freeze in the dark this winter. Angela Merkel closed down all of her nuclear power plants, but Germany's burning coal, and coal is like $500 a ton as I'm speaking to you. And so that didn't work out too well, shutting down those nuclear power plants for the Germans. And suddenly you find when people start freezing in the dark, they're no longer green. And so we're in a very weird place where we're at war. The largest country is Russia. He gobbled up Ukraine. That's a lot of food. There's a lot of food-driven inflation, a lot of instability coming in the developing world. I wouldn't put capital into Chile right now. They're spray painting "Eat the Luxics" on the wall. Very unstable in Latin America. A lot of very dangerous, very difficult. So there are very few places you can go mining. And now maybe Arizona looks pretty good, or Utah, or Nevada, or Montana. So Ivanhoe Electric is testing the proposition that the time has come to find great mines in the United States, and no one's tried it in 40 years. But we had a huge gold rush in California in the 1840s, 1849. The first place that gold was ever mined in the United States was in North Carolina at a place called Conrad Hill in 1781. And we own Conrad Hill in Ivanhoe Electric. We see it as a gold and copper project in North Carolina, of all places. So there's all kinds of crazy, untested geologic theories about the United States itself. And we are having a ball. We've revealed this thing, and my God, if you bought the stock yesterday, you'd be up 15% already, and it's still ridiculously undervalued. So, strangely, the United States is the weirdest and most dangerous place to explore. There's a huge copper deposit in Alaska called Pebble. That'll be a great mine for the 29th century. It has a pristine salmon fishery in the waters below the mine, and even Donald Trump Jr. came out against the development of that mine, amazingly. So it's not enough to find the mine. The mine has to be in a geopolitical location where it's okay to build it and you can design it to be very green. But this can be done starting with a clean sheet of paper. And so I think you shouldn't do this next meeting in Vancouver. And I don't know if they're going to give you the rooms for $300, but I think we could put up a big circus tent and do this in Casa Grande, Arizona, and show you what a mine in production really looks like. You know, it's really, really, really a big deal to make a green copper mine in America. It'll have a huge equity valuation on the New York Stock Exchange. It says JP Morgan on the prospectus. That is the biggest American bank. It was the only IPO in the United States in months. And you find a real growing panic. Have you been looking at this legislation that Senator Manchin agreed with Chuck Schumer? It's just gigadollars for mining in the United States, because they're realizing that America is in a very weak posture in its supply chain. And it's really a panic. Like, we're really in a dangerous position as a nation.
So, Robert, the next thing I want to talk about, and I think this will be hugely amusing, would be your take on what's broadly called ESG. And I want to talk to you about it in a couple of senses. One thing that struck me when you took me to Kamoa in Congo was the fact that, unlike most mining operations that I visited in Africa over the last 40 years, your African operation is run by Africans. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember you getting off the bus and running up and hugging some Congolese guy whose head was bigger than yours was, bigger than you were, never mind head. The fact that your operations in Mongolia were run by Mongolians, your operations in Africa were run by Africans. I want you to speak to a different part of ESG, which is where the S part of ESG should recognize any responsibility for 1.2 billion people on Earth who have no access to electricity, or 800 million people on Earth whose per capita food count is often below 1,000 calories a day. Talk to me about ESG in the real world and how you address that.
Yeah, it's a really big deal, because if all of us are the owners of a gold mine here in Boca Raton, Florida, and we're mining all this gold and we're flying it out of here to our headquarters in Afghanistan, the locals get really creepy and they say, why are you mining our gold and taking it out of the country? Because in most countries, the taxes and royalties go to the central government, where it disappears and nothing comes back to the local people. So they rebel against the mine. And so you have to completely re-examine the enterprise of mining in a way to make it truly sustainable, just out of your own self-interest. So the first thing is to have women run the mines. And women have children, and they're just more responsible than men. In Africa, a lot of the men are alcoholic, or they're chasing women. But the women have children, and they make incredible miners. So we take women and we hire them on the basis of their aptitude and their eagerness to learn. That's what we measure. We have 90 million people to choose from, 90 million. So we're picking extraordinary young women and men, and then we put them on these $3–4 million simulators, like 747 pilots. and they're trained to mine with $4 million machines. Nobody's lifting anything heavier than a pencil. There's no manual labor. Everything is automated. Since everything is automated, we put a Wi-Fi system underground. Everything is wireless. Everything is computerized. We can actually measure how well the women do versus the men. We can find out the machinery operated by the men is damaged more rapidly than the women. The men grind the gears. The women are very careful with the machinery. We find that the women are actually demonstrably better miners underground than the men. In the former Soviet Union, nobody would ever allow a man to run the head frame in a mine, because the man would be drinking vodka and then everybody would die in a mining accident. Everybody. They would never allow a man to operate that head frame. Women are more responsible miners than men. And we know what we're talking about. We've actually proven it. That doesn't mean that we have no men, because if it was all women, the men would get very cranky and they'd want to burn the mine down. But close to half of our trained people are young women, and we always train local people. If I bring an expat from Florida to go work in the Congo, the guy wants $400,000 a year and relocation and all kinds of fancy insurance. I can take a Congolese to run that same machinery and make those Congolese workers, they make more money than the Minister of Finance in the Congo, but they're very good workers, and maybe they're making $1,500, $2,000 a month. Phenomenally good workers. And in the Congo, our costs are in Congolese kwacha. That's a kind of money. But our revenues are in dollars. Do you understand? So if you've looked at the copper price and you think it's down, you should see the copper price in Japanese yen. Japanese yen has gone from 100 yen to the dollar to 135, 137. So in yen terms, the copper price is up. So when you're going to the developing world, you have the benefit of having your costs in a depreciating currency, but you're producing a dollar-denominated commodity. Now, everybody is looking at what you're doing. Every one of these phones is an NGO. Click, can't hide. So that S in ESG. People like BlackRock. BlackRock is run by Larry Fink. He's drinking the ESG Kool-Aid. We have to find a sustainable way to mine these metals. Historically, copper only had a price, the copper price. You see it in the Wall Street Journal or on Bloomberg every day. But in the future, we will have differential pricing for metals. If you can mine metal with no global warming gas, it'll trade at a premium. If you mine metal with a lot of coal burning and a lot of carbon dioxide generation, it will trade at a discount. Green aluminum today is already trading at a premium, like Mercedes or BMW will pay a premium for green aluminum, because when you buy your car, it shows you what it costs to build the car, and it shows you how much carbon dioxide per kilometer that car spews out of the tailpipe. But lastly, you see the amount of carbon dioxide it took to make that car. And that latter element means that the whole supply chain is becoming green. People like Apple. Your Apple One phone had 30 elements in the periodic table. This is an Apple 12. Soon to be an Apple 14. There's 85 elements in the periodic table in this Apple phone. 85. And yes, Alice, there's a lot of copper in this phone. So the biggest pucker factor is in these big name electronics companies like Apple, Samsung, Ford, GM, Tesla. They're very worried about the scrutiny of the supply chain right down to the mines. And everybody would rather that the mines be made in America. If you're going to build the cars in America, that's a whole new thing. So we'll probably end up being the miner for the automakers or for the brand name semiconductor companies. We are that. You're looking at Ivanhoe Electric and the Ivanhoe Mines Group. We're the greenest mining company in the world, and we're at the bottom of the world cost curve. I want to mention that Lucas Landino is an extremely close friend, an incredibly famous guy in the mining industry. He passed away prematurely of brain cancer. An incredible human being, and sort of a friend of mine who went to a lot of low-rent locations and built mines. There aren't many of us left, these living legends. Unfortunately, the younger generation went into broadband and internet and consumer electronics. We have a huge shortage of young men and women in mining and minerals exploration. And that's part of the challenge, is reinventing the industry with young blood. We do have a lot of young people now that think it's very cool, you know, and very interested. They know where this raw materials come from. Elon is begging for very, you know, critical raw materials because that's why he's selling his shares. He's not selling his shares because he's going to buy Twitter. He's selling his shares because he knows he doesn't see the nickel and copper and raw materials to really scale his company after 2024. So the miners are now in the control position. I've never seen such a very, very attractive point where the risk, all the risks in the world, all the crazy things, all the fears, interest rates, that's all in the price. But the demand for these materials is going to be like trying to get the contents of the Hoover Dam through a garden hose in 2024, 2025, which is why I'm actually insanely bullish. Unless an asteroid comes in at a low angle and wipes out all intelligent life as we know it, that would be bearish. But short of that sort of thing, and it's happened in the past in the history of this planet, assuming we go on as a species, we're headed to 9 billion people in the world. 9 billion. And everybody wants everything all the time. Everybody's on the internet. And when everybody has one of these devices and they're drawing down the sum total of human knowledge through 5G wireless by satellite, that uses a huge amount of energy. I always try to explain to people, when you do a Google search, it is not green, Alice. Every time you do a Google search, you know, it uses about the same amount of electricity as a 100-watt bulb for 16 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there are trillions of Google searches. You think it's free, but you're paying for it in advertising revenue. So the Google server farms have copper cables like this that have to be air conditioned. They're just chewing up huge amounts of power. And don't even get me started on cryptocurrencies. There's nothing green in cryptocurrency. They're using up astronomical amounts of energy trying to squeeze out that last piece of crypto. And governments are going to ban a lot of these cryptocurrencies because they like to control. They've already banned in China. And that sort of thing is opening soon at a theater near you. So if there was ever a bullish argument for gold, it's simply that cryptocurrency bled off too much of the speculation. And we'll see how that ends. So we're in a very interesting risk-reward period. And you have to be very careful about mining companies that have these legacy tailings dams. I think the legacy mining companies are not investable. I'm talking about the Rio Tintos, Anglo Americans, Vales, and BHPs, because they have these tailings dams that were built over the last 50 years. And if they fill up with rainwater and the earth starts to shake from any seismicity, the tailings have the consistency of Jell-O in a bowl, shaking it. The dam bursts, and then you lose the market cap of the company. Vale had a tailings dam that bursted. 400 people died, and they lost a third of their market cap. So these traditional mining companies that are mining in anywhere where it rains more than it evaporates have a problem. Don't buy a junior mining share if they're selling you on a mining venture where it rains more than it evaporates. That's called a positive water balance. If it looks like British Columbia with all those green trees, or if it looks like Brazil with all those green trees, it's probably raining more than it evaporates. When we build a tailings dam now in the industry, we have to guarantee its integrity in perpetuity. Now, that's a really long time in perpetuity, you know. So mining is better done in a desert. If it looks like Nevada or the Australian outback or Chile, we have a negative water balance in the Congo. We have a lot of evaporation. We're very careful now where we can mine. We can't mine in Russia. That's kaput, right? We can't mine in Ukraine. That's also kaput. We can't mine in Brazil. It rains too much. We can't mine in British Columbia, so there's fewer and fewer places we can mine. And even in America, there aren't too many deserts. We can go to Nevada or Utah or Arizona, but it's pretty hard to mine in downtown New York City, you know, Central Park. So we have, as an industry, we have fewer and fewer areas that we can mine. And we have to mine with green energy. And so you have to understand there's going to be a huge valuation placed on these metals. You don't have to buy my shares. You can buy copper metal, just bricks, and build your house out of copper metal bricks, cover it with gypsum wallboard. And in 5 or 10 years, you can tear your house down and buy a fleet of electric Lamborghinis with your profits. You don't necessarily have to buy a mining share. You can buy the metal, you know?
Sprott would like to help, by the way.
Yeah, but which metals and why is a subject of, you know, worthy discussion.
Robert, speaking of time, we're out of it. Thank you.
We're going to take a couple of Q&A, like, any other questions?
We've moved on. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of love from my friend Robert.